with your personal story, with your business story, and with the story you tell to the customers, all of those cases, story is equally powerful and really can be turned into this asset that enhances and gets you to better places and where they ultimately like to be.
That's Nick Raithel. He's on a mission to help leaders finally get the recognition they deserve. He's combined advanced time management strategies with his own experiences in publishing and marketing. The result was the 7-Hour Book, a service that's been delighting his clients and empowering their story.
You're listening to the Multifamily Leadership Podcast with Patrick Antrim, your source for success strategies for multifamily professionals, CEOs, executive leaders, and aspiring leaders that want to drive high-performance results for their property or portfolio.
This is Patrick Antrim, founder and CEO of Multifamily Leadership and producer of the Multifamily Leadership Summit, where we celebrate the best places to work multifamily. Welcome to the Multifamily Leadership Podcast, where I speak with executive leaders, authors, and business leaders on the topics that advance leadership in multifamily. It is our goal to give you insights into what top leaders are doing to drive financial results and great resident experiences for their portfolios. Now, if you want to get access to other resources such as videos, articles, show notes, other episodes of this podcast, and information on working with me or having me keynote your next event, you can visit multifamilyleadership.com. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/multifamily. Get your free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/multifamily. You can also access the link in the show notes at multifamilyleadership.com. All right, friends, we're talking today about the power of story. Tell me, Nick, you help people create story and new business from the power of story. Tell me, how do you organize your thoughts in story?
You organize your thoughts and story by beginning, first and foremost, with a look and a discussion of why you want to organize your thoughts and why you want to do it in that particular way. So really starting, as Simon Sinek says, with why.
That's good. So does this matter both from a professional standpoint? So if I'm a mid-level manager or executive leader and I'm trying to figure out how to get to the next level, how to tell my story of why I'm the person that they need to select as the next vice president, or perhaps I'm trying to acquire a new management account, and I need that new company to figure out why we're the better choice, why we add more value to their needs. This works in a professional and also in a company standpoint, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me, with the market, meaning the real estate market, multifamily market, and just the general way that consumers are purchasing and acquire customers today, there's so many distractions and information is coming at us, and we've all been to deep education on how to market and position products and push our message out there. And the good news is we're learning about new great products. The bad news is our customers, the people we're trying to rent to or sell to or acquire, are also getting those messages. Tell me why story is important in standing out in today's world.
Well, story is important because it's not about pushing. You mentioned pushing those messages out there, having to really fight and kind of go head-to-head, jostle your way, arm and elbow your way against your competitors. Ultimately, that's going to be counterproductive. What it's really about today is it's not about the push marketing. It's about the pull marketing. What's been termed by some as the magnet or the magnetic marketing. It's about pulling them to you. And if you're looking to do that, nothing really has that magnetic power as a story. I mean, stories just have a kind of pull, they have a kind of connection that you form with them. It's even, if you want to go even further back, just historically speaking, it's even the reason why today we remember Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey. We remember those. That's the reason why those stories were able to be passed down before they were even written down, passed down through speaking, because they just stuck and they had that power.
So, I mean, brands are marketing things that are unfun. Sometimes, if it's an apartment building, you have your competition and you're renting a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in a certain market, and down the street there's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in a certain market. What do you suggest? I mean, what with story and how to, if this is the way to differentiate and really be compelling and, top of mind and pull in those new customers, those new residents. Tell me where do we begin? I mean, I know we talked about understanding why, but where do we begin in the process? Do we start blogging? Do we start doing video? What are the things that we need to be thinking about?
I'll tell you where you don't begin, first off. You don't begin with the Iliad or the Odyssey, which I just mentioned. Those would probably be a little bit too long. And as the expression goes, they would probably be Greek, so to speak, with you and your customers. Where you would begin in that case, you would start, as we mentioned, with why, thinking about the why of this particular case. So I'd imagine that in your case with these units, you're probably trying to make them more appealing. And if that was, in fact, in this instance, your purpose and your goal with it, then your story would become your focus with the story would become, how do you present these units and the background and the backstory to them in a way that the customers are going to be able to connect with? Maybe you mention, for example, that a famous person before, maybe an actor or actress from the 1960s had owned the property before, and that they'd gone there on vacations, used it as a vacation property, or that they even live there. So you could bring that aspect of story into it. Or if you're not so fortunate as to have had a celebrity like that, maybe what you do is you create a new story, almost a hypothetical one, of what a person and what a family, if they were to move there, could have, what story they could have if they were to live there in the future. Those would be two examples.
So you're getting them to kind of picture themselves there before they're even a customer, a potential customer, maybe experiencing the amenities. What would it feel like to, be home from work in 10 minutes versus an hour and a half that you have now, or scenarios like that? I've heard this in radio ads a lot. I mean, is it the psychology of how we move into action or make decisions? I mean, is it? I've heard scenario selling. You'll hear an automotive dealership talk about, our overflow lot is full, and we got all these new shipped cars, and they're top of the line, and the other ones must go, and so that's essentially an urgency created story, perhaps a hypothetical one. Is that the way we like to make decisions, or does it influence us when there's a story involved?
I certainly think it does. And the reason for that is that it helps us to see, even if it's not necessarily the case at that point, it helps us to see how it could be in the event that we were to take action, and in the event that those things which have been described were actually to come to pass. And as the saying, as the expression goes, if you can believe it, if you can see it, you'll believe it. And if you can see it in your mind like that, then you're going to believe it. You're going to take action on it.
Right. We opened up with, understanding our the why and understanding the story. Now, if you are engaging with a potential customer or resident, and we need to understand. You're indicating we need to understand a little bit more about what they're trying to create. I mean, do we make assumptions on this? Are there ways to first in the discovery process understand what is important to them, and then structure compelling stories that allow them to see themselves living here?
Yes, absolutely. And if you do have the opportunity, just get out there and talk to them. I think that might be for a lot of people all that they really need to do. Just get out and talk to your target market. Get out and talk to the potential people you're going to be working with. Even if you don't end up later working with them, you're going to get some great insights. If you can't do that, pick up the phone and try to go through that same approach. Call, as they say, a random sampling and just get that feedback. If you can't do that, maybe you go on, if you're in the multifamily or you're in sort of a residential space, maybe you just go on Zillow and some of these other sites where people have posted comments or they've otherwise given feedback on what they're looking for and what they're interested in. And you see from that. And you can base your insights and your actions on that direct feedback there, rather than guessing, rather than making moves and potentially spending company money that might otherwise be wasted.
That's good. And we've been talking about customer acquisition, resident acquisition, maybe acquiring new clients, but let me shift it over to culture and companies. I mean, we need to do the same thing with our business. We need to make it attractive for people that are great, so then they'll want to aspire to work for us, or perhaps make a shift in their business goals. And so tell me, Story, how does that relate to building a great culture?
In terms of building a culture, one of the things that I think is very important for people to think about, and for us to probably touch on here as we're talking about it, is an example of something that really sets the standard and raised the bar in terms of how we think about story and culture. And that would be, of course, Tony Hsieh's book, Delivering Happiness, Tony Hsieh being of Zappos, for the reason that with that book and inside the book with the story that he was able to tell, he was able to shape Zappos' culture. He was able to attract people to the organization to work there who were talented and might otherwise have gone elsewhere. He was certainly able to mobilize the staff and the energies of the people at work in Zappos. So that's a prime example that I think a lot of people should think about as they're considering corporate culture and as they're considering the use of story in communicating and creating that culture.
That's powerful. And I know that, creating this culture is the responsibility of everyone. I mean, a lot of people think, well, my company has a mission statement, has a vision statement, and has the alignment of their goals, and I'm going to just subscribe to that culture. Well, you could be a leader in a company and be in charge of a department or a unit, and you have your own team culture, because anytime there's different people on different teams, that team has its own unique culture, just the way that leader likes to hear information, the types of personalities that are on that team. And so how does this work from the other, if we flip it around? If I'm a leader and I'm trying to get to the next level, how does that power of story allow me to sell upper management or an investor owner on why I'm the next excellent leader?
That's an interesting question. It's certainly interesting, I think, from the standpoint of taking the overall culture and kind of breaking it down and compartmentalizing a little bit for you in particular as someone within that organization. What I think you would do in this case is you would think about what the overall company story is, provided they have one, or what it could be if it needs to be created. And you would try to figure out how within that story, which character, if you will, you would be. Or you would figure out what your own story arc would be within the broader narrative. So if, for example, you are a vice president now, maybe your part in the story arc, the figurative or even the actual one, maybe your part would be that you're in line to potentially become a director, an executive director at some point later down the line, or you're in line for some larger form of succession in the company. So you figure out how you would fit within that larger arc, and then you align your actions, you align the work that you're putting in now, all of that, with the larger arc, and you make the upper management aware of what you're doing, if not already, and really try to communicate it and add that value as you're doing it.
That's interesting. Are people patient enough in that process, do you think? I mean, it just goes to show you in any marketing, it takes time to do it right. You don't want to rush it. But as a career, it sounds to me what you just described. I mean, you can essentially attain anything you want to attain. A lot of people are doing that to become an entrepreneur. But if you just want to get to that next level, that's great advice you just shared. So tell me, are people patient enough, though, in developing that process?
Hard to say. I wouldn't want to speak for everyone necessarily. I think that I think.
But we live in a world. We live in a world where just put yourself in a perspective of. You've got that leader. It's week to week. Sales are week to week, and month end closes and financial statements happen. Shareholder returns are being reported quarterly, and there's the urgency of now, and what have you done today? So how do you manage that along with this sort of long term, patient process of positioning yourself?
In that case, it depends on who you're talking to. If the day-to-day conversation is going on with the upper management and going on with people who you need to show exact results now, then of course you probably can't be as slow, and nor should you be as slow. But if you're talking on the longer term and you're also talking for yourself specifically, then yes, patience is certainly going to be, as they say, a virtue, and it's probably going to be allowing you to have the rationality and the level-headedness to see what the best path would be and to then take action accordingly.
So tell me, going back to Tony's book on this happiness, tell me a little bit about why you decided to pick that up and read it, or maybe download it as an audiobook.
Well, the fact with delivering happiness, I mean, it being, selling bazillions of copies and being on those bestseller lists certainly didn't hurt. But what attracted me personally to delivering happiness was seeing how it had worked in multiple facets, seeing how it had taken, for example, as we said, Zappos from being, a reliable, decent company to being this juggernaut that everyone has heard of, that's widely respected, that, people, young college students, for example, others can't wait to go out and work for, that really stands out in its market, and overall it's held up as this pinnacle of corporate success and of corporate culture success. That really attracted me to the book.
That's good. Sounds like you have a curious mind. Do you think that's important in developing stories, or?
Yeah, I think it really is, and I think, of course, curiosity in just about anything, as a business owner, as an executive, as a leader, is important, because curiosity is what enables you to go to that next level, to even think that maybe that next level could be out there, and that if it does, what would it consist of? And so when you start asking those what-if questions, you end up really peeling back the layers, if you will, of the metaphorical onion, and really digging to the heart of the matter and saying, oh my goodness, this is so much bigger than I thought.
How can you, I believe there are people out there that they have these hidden, I don't want to say hidden like they're hiding, but they're just untold stories or untold opportunities that perhaps they don't identify themselves. Maybe they're limiting their own potential or beliefs because they don't believe people want to hear it or that there is any value of it. But it seems to me companies today telling the story of the people behind the brand versus the brand itself. And so is it powerful to have people telling their own executive stories, even though they're not an independent author, or they're an employee and they're working at a company. But what they do is important for that company, and it helps illustrate the value that potential customers that would create would experience. And so, do you believe that people should be sort of speaking outside their comfort levels or developing that process?
I completely agree, and I'll tell you why. A couple of reasons. If you're pushing yourself outside of that comfort level, not only are you going to grow personally, but you're also going to gain a greater sense of what you're capable of. And I would also add that we live in the age right now of the intrapreneur, not just the entrepreneur, but the intrapreneur, in the sense that, as Seth Godin mentioned in his excellent book, Linchpin, you've got to make yourself indispensable. And one of the best ways, especially if you're within a company, not necessarily the top person or top dog, so to speak, running it, but a director within the company or someone in middle management, you've got to make yourself indispensable. And when you have that story of your own, and when you're out there potentially speaking or publishing in some way, then you're really creating your own value and making yourself indispensable to your organization.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, as a leader, we do research nationally on organizations around the country, specifically multifamily apartment developers, operators, managers. And in this research, we're looking at levels of engagement, how to increase the levels of engagement. And there's some interesting findings. And one of those, under the corporate cultures and communications category, I'll call it, is helping people to understand the importance of their role. And oftentimes we're dealt with, in this business, it can be highly transactional, many assignments, tasks to do. And it essentially restarts on a monthly basis. Every month there's another rent collection and work orders and just basic fundamental parts of the business that seem to never go away, of taking care of communities and people. And those companies that are hitting high marks and high levels of engagement are doing extra efforts to communicate to employees the importance of their role. So if you could picture a maintenance supervisor on site who has been up all night because they were checking in on a resident that had an emergency work order, and the vice president of the organization pops in because they had a meeting in town, and they visit the property, and they walk the property and they encounter the maintenance supervisor, and they have a small little conversation. And in that exchange, both of them have an opportunity to tell a powerful story. Both of them, the maintenance supervisor can illustrate and demonstrate the value that not only he's developing for the business, but also his potential or her potential. And same for the vice president. That's an opportunity to engage with the employee and let him or her know that what they do matters. And I want to explore that scenario that I just painted in what you talked about early about the hypothetical or sort of the intrinsic part, but basically, what can somebody do in that scenario as the leader, the vice president, to help somebody who may think that maybe they're lost or not, getting the attention they deserve, feel the power of what their potential could be?
I think a good way to start would be to look at, kind of on a smaller level, look at the why in that case. So I think that, Patrick, you sort of hit on it with making the employee feel important, making them feel like their work matters. So if that was the why, then I would say you would want to then look at where the person who you're going to be addressing, where they are at in terms of feeling their significance and feeling their importance. Is this someone who, from looking at their performance reviews, you kind of have questions and you're thinking that maybe they're not as engaged, maybe their behavior at work or their performance is starting to reflect that? Or, on the other end, is this someone who's consistently hitting it out of the park, so to speak, who you really want to, if anything, capture that enthusiasm and take it, as we've said, to the, quote, next level? So in that case, the way you would frame your interaction with them would probably be to maybe give them some kind of incentive or some sort of benefit or reward based on what you're hearing and what they're sharing. So you'd really craft the exchange, I think, either way, either more in a motivational sense or more in the sense of kind of helping them to get on course and getting them on track.
Yeah. Is there somewhere, well, not maybe somewhere, but what can people do to develop storytelling? Do we need to watch more movies, read more stories? Is it something we practice?
I think that for stories, it's funny, you mentioned watch more movies. That was one of the things that was starting to flash into my mind as well, because movies really are one of the most powerful forms of storytelling out there. Think about, what are some examples? Think about, what are the popular movies? Star Wars, for example. Those are stories that aren't even real, that take place in worlds that don't even exist. They probably couldn't exist in terms of physics laws, but they endure because of the power that is in those stories. And those stories too, I'm certainly not a science fiction or comic book geek or anything like that, but just from a basic understanding of those stories, it's all relationships. It's all people-based stories. I think Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, those guys in their movies, it's all about family, for example. Their big thing is family, which is a connection between people. Everybody has families. Everybody can understand that basic relationship. So I think that kind of taking that into consideration with what we're talking about now, whatever story you make and whatever story you're going to build in your company, in your organization, in your own position, at that company, at that organization, should come down to people, so with strong characters, or it should come down to some kind of a people and interpersonal relationship that everyone's familiar with, that everyone can relate to. And because we can all relate to that, it's instantly understandable, and it makes it that much easier for you to communicate it.
Yeah, that's great. You talked about Star Wars and these stories that aren't even real, but they sell well, right? They do well. People follow them many, many years, generational, over many, many years, listening and watching and merchandise and all the things that go along with it. You said something interesting about how they're not real, and I know you touched in about the hypothetical and creating a new story. I hear companies, and this is, I've seen on the side of vans, that are selling carpet cleaning, and it says family-owned business, or in hiring practice, I hear leaders say, we treat people like family. Now, you're making the assumption of what that means, though. You're making the assumption of family. Now, family could have been a really horrific thing for some people. It's not always. I know what they're intending, and I know what they're trying to say is that, we care for you and we value you and all of these things. But when we make that assumption, what happens? Because we're not creating that story. We're making them think of their story about what it is.
What you could do, I would say, and side note, you make me laugh pretty hard with that family thing, because it's so true. And your company, if you're communicating, the standpoint of family, you definitely would not want your clientele and your prospects to think of, you being family as, doing any kind of unfortunate physical trauma to them. That's not the idea here. But if you were going to set that tone and set a correct tone with the hypothetical story. What you could do would be, first off, to not just throw out taglines and blanket statements like, when you're here, your family, which I'm not trying to knock a certain Italian restaurant brand, but I know that they have and maybe even still do use that as their slogan. But you want to really go beyond just the blanket phrases and the taglines. Really add some weight and some depth to it. It's kind of the difference between, if you will, the different finenesses or delicacies of, say, pencils. I mean, you can get pencils into mechanical pencils, for example. There are different thicknesses for the lead. So maybe some of them are, 0.05, some of them are 0.5. I'm no expert in it. But it really comes down to the thickness and the depth with which you're shading. So are you going to shade and create your story on just sort of a skin-deep, basic level? Or are you going to really go into there in depth, going in 3 dimensions, going not only in black and white, but also going into kind of Technicolor or even high definition, or even, depending on how TVs are now, into 3 dimensions? Are you going to do that with the story that you're creating? And I would say if you are, if you're going to go into those greater levels of depth and shade and context, then you're going to have much better results.
That's just some good visuals. You told a great story there. I think that I believe the companies are trying to do the right thing by getting people to picture them using their product or even working within the organization. But what is the authentic story versus the corporate story? Is it more? I know we touched a little bit about this, but is it more powerful to hear the story of, we're the developer, and 3 generations ago we came into town and we bought the land, and with this land we did these great things, and then over the years we've developed these areas and communities, and people have celebrated holidays and things like that, and that's how we built the structure, and therefore, there's black and white photos, historical photos on the wall, and there's a legacy here, and you should choose to rent here. You should choose to live here. Versus the authentic story of perhaps an employee that transferred into town and was looking for a place to live and moved into our community, and then therefore learned of an opportunity because she or he was always seeing the leasing and the management team with glowing smiles on their faces, and they're always seem like they're working in a resort atmosphere, and they never have a trouble on their mind. And not all properties, by the way, are resort properties. Some of them are dealing with complex and complicated things in tough areas and things like that. But is that a better example of how to tell more of an authentic story versus the corporate brand forced story?
In this case, I would say it comes down to who are you telling the story to. Just as in the same way as the movies we mentioned, someone who does not like science fiction movies, we were just talking about Star Wars, someone who doesn't like science fiction movies, you wouldn't want to tell the Star Wars stories to. It just wouldn't resonate with them. Versus someone who's into those kind of things and into spaceships and the like would eat those stories up, as they have, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. So the first thing you've got to ask yourself in creating and conveying these stories is, who are you telling it to? And everything else follows from that once you know the audience and you know the market.
So in my example, the story the developer's telling is their legacy and how they acquired this deep wealth and opportunity and land and built these communities. But that's the corporation's story. not the resident or the customer story, correct? I mean,
yeah, I think that in that case, it probably, and I say probably, would be the story. It could, though, be the customer story if you're trying, for example, to show your customers you, unlike the upstarts and the people who really lack qualifications in your market and among your competitors, you have those roots in the community. I mean, think about what are some of the old brands out there? Think about
well, the Wells Fargo, the Stagecoach.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
right. I mean,
it's a symbol. Is what they've done with that. They've taken the symbol of the Stagecoach and they've incorporated it and built a story behind it, which is used to powerfully convey their brand. But at the same time,
trusted.
Exactly. Trusted too. And at the same time, though, retaining talent. That other story you mentioned with the person who just moved to town will be very powerful in attracting people. Or it could also be used if you want to convey to your customers the kinds of people that they'll encounter in working with you to engage the customers and to draw in more customers, in that you're showing who's engaged, what kinds of people are engaged working for your company, and therefore providing a statement of the kind of service, even the ease in the relationship that prospective customers are going to have when working with you.
We're coming up towards the end of our show here, and I was just wanting to hear from you of any last thoughts you'd want to leave with in the power of story.
Well, I think that one of the big thoughts is don't underestimate its power. I mean, it's something that causes stories from ancient Greece to persist to this day. It sells billions upon billions of science fiction things, whether in action figure form, lunchboxes, movies, whatever. Its story is very powerful in that context. And then I think in sort of the third context, what we're talking about here, with your personal story, with your business story, and with the story you tell to the customers, all of those cases, story is equally powerful and really can be turned into this asset that enhances and gets you to better places and where they ultimately like to be if you can use the story effectively.
Oh, those are some great thoughts, Nick. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your time.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
You bet.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the Multifamily Leadership Podcast. For show notes and other resources, visit multifamilyleadership.com.
If you get a few moments, please subscribe, rate, and review this show on iTunes or on your own favorite platform. This helps others discover our program, and it tells us that we are doing a good job. A good job. A good job. A good job. A good job.